Okay. Andy, did you want to do intros of everyone or did you want to dive in?
Um, you know, I don't, if people want to introduce themselves like we normally do, I think that's cool. I know a lot of them don't have their cameras on. Um, so it's, I don't know, we can leave it up to everyone.
Yeah, we don't have to do intros. If y'all want to put your cameras on, that'd be great. I'm not a huge fan of staring at black screens for 2 hours. So, oh, hell yeah. There we go. We got one. Oh
Yay.
my God, we got more. All these Michigan people. Yo,
I
what up,
know.
Billy? Um, okay. I'm not forcing you, but it is nicer to have some like feedback. I'll give a little intro because it looks like a lot of y'all are Michigan people. So I'm Chris Hewen. I started up a journal club for my school um, when I was a first year, and then when things went COVID, I just moved it online to Zoom, and then I reached out to some other clinicians and other students and new grads to just kind of present on topics that they're interested in. So Andy obviously is going to present on MI because it's like his second like wife pretty much, and it's gonna be great. And so we go, if y'all are ever interested in continuing the party, we do like 4 week chunks. So this is the last week of like behavior change, motivational interviewing, and then the next 4 weeks is going to be ACL rehab. So I'm trying to get a speaker for each of those 4 weeks that is like a current clinician that's kind of specializing in ACL rehab. um but yeah, Andy, do you want to give like a brief little intro for maybe like the two people on this call that don't know you? One
Sure.
might know you already.
I was like trying to see, so like Robbie, I actually know from Grand Rapids. I invited him, so I know him. Um, Yeah, we're all about to be, third years this fall. And I've been doing motivation interviewing in some capacity, even before I really knew I was using it, based on like my certification with precision nutrition and stuff like that, because that's how they teach people. They teach coaches how to coach people through behavior change. And yeah, I just kind of got really excited about sharing with clinicians and students how they can use motivation interviewing in the clinic potentially, because I think it's this thing we're all taught, but I don't think it's this thing we're all really trained on. So I think it's something that uh, doesn't take much to get started with, to kind of get on the road to helping somebody, but to master it is a little daunting, and it takes kind of like a leap of faith to really accept that there's this awesome form of dialogue that you can use to teach people how to use their motivations to strive towards their own change. Don't know what else to say.
Crushed it.
Okay.
So you have a paper that you want to chat about, and then you kind of also wanted to do just a free flow kind of maybe case scenarios or your experience, then maybe have a few people you do like a back and forth with. Is that right?
Yeah, so probably not going to spend too much time on the paper, depending on how like organically we discuss it. But really, I did prepare a not a presentation with slides, but I have some activities that we're going to be doing and kind of talking about some of the principles of MI. But I'm not really going to be discussing like the ins and outs of motivation reading, like how to do open-ended questions, or how to summarize, or do affirmations or reflections. So it's because a lot of that we've already heard about. So it's kind of just my take on why change is hard, and kind of like the implementation of MI in the clinic is how I see it.
Hell yeah. Works for me, man.
Cool. So the paper, um, first thing actually before we get started, I was going to have everyone grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. So just have that handy, because I have no slides, and a little bit of participation is cool. And you're not going to do anything with it yet, so don't, just have it nearby. And while you're grabbing that, I'll just keep kind of going here. I just want to warn you guys, most of my classmates already know this, but I talk kind of a lot. So I have notes with me to kind of guide me, but I do go on tangents. So at any point, feel free to jump in and we can discuss, or if you have questions. With the sections that I have prepared on certain talking points. I'll pause. And if you guys want to chime in, like at any moment, like please do. I don't want to, just be talking to myself. Although I could. So I chose this paper because it's commonly supposed that ego depletion and willpower like are limited resources. And obviously with behavior change, a lot of people go, you may have heard or said yourself, man, if I just had more willpower, I could wake up earlier. It just seems to be this intangible thing that kind of is not really, it's kind of always in flux, and it just seems like on Monday and Tuesday you're making smoothies every day, and Wednesday you're oversleeping and drinking too much. Like it's this weird thing. So this paper has Carol Dweck. She wrote Mindset. I haven't read Mindset, but I think a lot of what maybe this paper kind of talks about might be in the book. So it's definitely a recommended reading, especially by the Level Up Initiative, which we can talk more about at the end if some of my classmates haven't heard about that. But the idea that willpower is finite came from a series of studies. One of the studies that I remember that I've read that's been talked about is this. They took two groups of people. They asked them to show up a little bit hungry, and they gave one group of people some radishes. Mark's done PN1, so he's probably heard this study. And they gave another group of people a bowl of cookies, and both sets of bowls were there the whole time. And they told one group to eat the cookies and one group to eat the radishes and not eat the cookies. And then that the study was over after they, some time went by. And then they did a subsequent study immediately after where they were told to complete a puzzle. And they didn't know this, but it was an impossible puzzle to complete. And what they found was the people who only ate the cookies spent twice as long trying to solve the impossible puzzle. So kind of the conclusions that they came, they came away from that paper were the people who had to exert more willpower to, stop themselves from eating the cookies ended up, demonstrating a finite amount of willpower. And so this study, for anybody that didn't read it, it looked at a varying theories of ego depletion and wanted to see how people would perform based on a non-limited resource theory, or essentially, your mental stamina fuels itself kind of theory, which led to them doing a demanding initial task, but it didn't undermine the subsequent performance on another task. And what they ended up discussing was that people's depletion effects are better predicted by people's perceptions of depletion rather than their actual experience. And so, simply telling someone that willpower might not be finite might have an effect, right? Or show that it had an effect on their ego depletion. So what's your guys' takeaway on that, just kind of right from the get-go?
I'll go first. I will caveat that I'm a little skeptical of Carol Dweck and some of those more well-known psychology studies. Quinn Hennick was on a few months ago, and we looked at, it was John Ioannidis, who's out of Stanford as well. He's like a big epidemiologist, and they did this huge study of 300 of one of the more popular psychology papers within the past, I think 20 or 30 years. And they had a team of researchers try to reproduce those super well-known, kind of well-cited psychology papers. And it was over 50% that they couldn't reproduce. And so they're there's this huge reproducibility crisis. We don't even know if those initial papers, should they just be taken with a grain of salt? So I'm always skeptical when I look into some of the OG psychology literature, because it's it sounds really cool. That cookie study has been cited all the time, and it makes sense, right? All those things. And I can link that paper for y'all. It's pretty dope. I was trying to find it. But I mean, I really do. I like the concept of your perception matters with this whole thing of, it made me think about Nassim Taleb, his Anti-Fragile book, of you're kind of viewing yourself as an individual who can tolerate stressful situations or actually grow from them. And so that's the big takeaway I have from the mindset literature and from just ego depletion of how are you viewing the circumstance that you're in. That was kind of my big takeaway from this.
That's why I love Journal Club, because you know, I mean, clubs are awesome to begin with, but yeah, I had no idea that your perspective is completely, you know, from your experiences, what you read. I think it's awesome to bring that to the table because, you know, this whole time I've been citing the radish and the cookie story, but like, yeah, when there's a reproducibility crisis, and that's why science is so great, in my opinion, right? You know, if you can get more studies to show that something is wrong, right, then it's just kind of keep perpetuating the cycle of science and make you think about kind of the skepticism. I think is not the same as cynicism. So it's okay to be skeptical and approach studies like this. So that no, was a really good take. Anybody else? Or
I'll chime in. So when I was reading it, in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking about when you're looking at psychology and trying to take groups of students, especially, there's just so much more going on in the background than I think we can really measure. So, and a lot of the way they categorize the students in either what was it, ego? What were the two categories? Whether you believe willpower affects whether you believe willpower is finite or it's not finite. The means were so close. It was like a 6-point ordinate scale, and like the means were so close. So like obviously most of the students believed that it's partial. You know what I mean? So it's not like all students believe that this is completely finite, or all the students believe that this is completely infinite. So I just thought it just seemed like like it looks good, and reading through it like, oh, that's interesting, but I just think there's a lot of background noise that was ignored, and it's going to be hard to actually replicate a study like this and actually identify those variables that are going on in the background. So that's just kind of my thoughts when I was reading through it.
nice, yeah. Chris, do you have I saw you unmute. You have a point?
Yeah, I was gonna say to that point, Robbie. I think it was like the fourth study where it was like the questionnaire study, and they said they like picked out 100 students or 100 people initially filled it out, and then the follow-up was like 40 students. And it's like that doesn't instill much confidence that like that's not a huge selection bias sample size if less than half of the people are responding. So some of those things within some of these studies, it's like how much actual strong bias was in all of these, whether or not it was like consciously done or not.
I remember as a student taking psychology courses, they would make us do studies like this in order to get credit for the class. And you could easily see like a student just trying to get through like, oh, I got to do this to graduate. Like, yeah, sure. 6, 5. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, let's go. Get me out of here. So just along that same line.
Yeah.
Hey, Andy, this is Amy York.
Hi.
Hey, so, I was reading this today, and I think it's just where I'm at because I'm preparing for the fall semester, right? And as a faculty member, thinking about things that I can say to students that will help give them the opportunity to kind of persevere when things are tough or when things are challenging. So this idea of I'm reading this like exhaustion was not assigned to reduce effort, that as at different components of a semester, students demonstrate different behaviors or have different levels of exhaustion. And what are small things that I could say or do that would kind of promote this idea of having unlimited amounts of willpower or perseverance, or you know what I mean? So that when I was reading it today, I think it's just because where I'm at and what I'm thinking about. And so I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that, of in those moments when you're feeling exhausted, right? What are the things that help you kind of continue to persevere?
I think motivation and mood is a huge factor for me personally. But there were other studies where they found that mood did not necessarily influence their outcomes. But I mean, motivation is huge for me, the importance of it and what you're doing, like Robbie was saying, with some of the experiments and that, how interested are they in doing this? And I think as a student too, certain things influence us in certain semesters, and what our caseload, or what our caseload, what our class load is, and certain things like that.
Yeah, I think the two studies that I referenced, that this one and then the Radish one, I think it's interesting. I picked these studies because I don't know how much willpower actually affects behavior change as much as people tend to like put all their chips onto, like I said at the beginning, right? If I just had more willpower, I could get to the gym more often. I think it comes down to managing a set of skills on top of having that mindset. So I don't know what, can be said to students that will make them have like a more positive experience with themselves as they meet challenges head on. So I think there's obviously tons of variables, and being resilient when things become harder, like during midterms, is obviously a big factor as well. So I think it's more, a lot of self-talk as well. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what you could say in a few sentences to get somebody to continue on in stride at the same level of, effort, and demonstrate a consistent amount of willpower. I don't know that it answered your question, Dr. York, but obviously there are a lot of variables at play, and it's context is king. And I think it's also down to the individual and how resilient they are.
And I also thought about this idea of flow, right? Finding the right activity that's interesting enough and just hard enough that, right, that you stay engaged in that task. That sometimes, like thinking about that motivation, if you're in a class that you don't have interest in, as a faculty member, I have only limited influence of how much I can help you be interested in it.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very true.
When you guys were talking about that, especially the student thing, my head also went straight to like setting up your environment for success. The first example that came to my mind was like when I'm studying and stuff like that. If my cell phone's in the room, I don't care how much willpower I have. If I hear it buzz, I'm probably going to give up studying and look at my phone. But they've got boxes that you can lock your phone in, or you can put it in another room or something like that. And right away, I know that helps me kind of get into that flow state or stay more motivated. Another example that I think about is, if you've got cookies sitting in your kitchen, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I can have all the willpower in the world, but if they stay there for, a couple of days, it's going to be hard for me to have that finite willpower and not eat them. So if you set your environment up to kind of for success in the direction that you want to go, I think that also helps, along with the mindset and the other things that we've talked about.
Yeah, Mark, to that point, and Andy, what you said earlier about you kind of being skeptical of willpower is like whether that's a driving force behind change. I totally agree with both of y'all. It's like, if you're stressed out, if you have kids, if you have like sleep deprivation, if you have other things, there's no way you're not going to do the more enticing thing. And as Mark said, it's like, it's such an environmental environment is so huge. And that's where I think you're going to go with this talk, or a lot of like behavior change in general. It's like a lot of times you're just primed to fail in a lot of senses, because as we talked about, like you have the cue, the routine, and the reward. And if your cue is to like consistently see the cookie, or consistently like want to go sit down and go to the couch, it's like, well, the routine's going to happen and then you're going to have that reward. So it is like, no matter how much willpower you have, if you don't change the environmental context or the cues, you're literally setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and I have on my list of things to talk about later on. And Mark, having done precision nutrition, probably knows this concept as well, but that there's two brain systems working independently of each other at all times. So you have the emotional side, the logical side, And then the third component in terms of behavior change might be the path or the environment. So you're constantly making decisions based on those two sides of the brain, but then also there's this influence of the path or the environment. So I kind of break that down a little bit later as well. So if we don't one of the last takeaways I had for the paper, with all the skepticism there is behind it, what is the risk versus reward for telling somebody that, hey, sometimes doing a difficult task might actually give you more energy to do further difficult tasks. Whether it works or not, it kind of plays into maybe the placebo, but whether or not other studies have come out to say that, is it wrong to tell somebody, hey, maybe not even say exactly, hey, some evidence says, exactly what I said, that you might have more willpower more energy to do other things later if, you carry out hard tasks to begin with. What's the risk in telling somebody that? If any.
I wouldn't say there's a risk, and I would say there's that's just a huge carryover to physical therapy of there inherently has to be that understanding that most PT is great at exposure and progressive overload to a task. And that's really kind of the same concept of you're consistently exposing individuals to harder stresses or threats, whatever that looks like. And it's just over a period of time, and you're kind of explaining, or you're having them realize that, oh, I can handle this, even though I'm either perceiving it's hard or it is physically draining. So I don't think there's a risk at all, unless the individual thoroughly believes that they're either going to get injured or they're too fragile or whatever it is. So it's maybe just having them create that experience or that understanding that this is just kind of a part of the path.
Cool. I like that. Okay, so that's the paper, and I have now, quote unquote, presentation, something that I prepared, but it is, again, no slides. So you're just going to look at my face, and there will be some participation in things. But I realized that time, might be a factor. These things usually go for an hour and a half, depending on the lengths of discussions and stuff that we get into. So feel free, if you have to jet at any time, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I probably might not even notice. But in kind of like I said earlier, what I'm into with motivational interviewing, I wanted to throw out there that I am creating a community forum for behavior change and motivational interviewing. And if anybody's interested in continuing on conversations like this and want to join, it's not a very big community right now, but as we grow, it'll be kind of exciting to see where that goes. So if anybody's interested, it's slack.motiveperform.com. And don't do it now, but if you're interested in joining that, it's separate than Facebook, because Facebook is quite distracting. And there's a mobile app and a desktop app and things like that. And it's a great place to share ideas and coordinate discussions like this. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The other thing is that kind of the resources that I get a lot of this information from come from my experience with Precision Nutrition Level 1 and Level 2. Level 1 is a self-paced course that the first half of the textbook talks about nutrition physiology, and the second half is all about coaching. And Level 2 is actually a year-long coaching course where you are coached on how to coach people, which is super meta. But they do bi-weekly habits and case studies and things like that. And really over the course of a year, you learn a lot about yourself because you have to put yourself in those shoes of the clients and things like that. And it was by far one of the best experiences I've had in terms of continuing education. So if anybody has an interest in teaching people about nutrition or coaching in general, I highly, highly recommend Precision Nutrition. They're a very evidence-based company. I also, I can leave a list of this for anybody that wants it, but Switch is a textbook by Chip and Dan Heath. Motivational Interviewing and Nutrition and Fitness. And then Rolnick and Miller actually started motivational interviewing in the 90s, 1990 to be exact. And it's been adapted since then as a form of dialogue that was really popular in addictions counseling. So it's widely popular in the psychology field. So before we get started going further, can I get this crowd to tell me 10 things that they already know about motivational interviewing? And it could be one word, it could be a sentence, it could be 2 sentences. I just want 10 things.
It's a big buzzword within motivational interviewing is ready, willing, and able.
Nice.
I know that it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle.
Open-ended questions.
Yep, empathy, open-ended questions. Anna says listen, so listening is a huge part of it. Alex, what did you say?
I was just going to say, let the patient lead the conversation and let them make the decision.
Mm-hmm. Good questions matter. Hey, Paul, how's it going? Yeah, so that was really more like an ode to Dr. York. She does that at the beginning of her lectures at Michigan. So she always asks us to write 10 things on the board before things get started. So yeah, listening, showing empathy, good questions matter. I mean, I think those are all really good things. The bottom line up front, it actually, as well as that, I got really excited about this because I read that like only 35% of patients actually do their home exercise program. And I've been quoting that. And I think 10 minutes before this presentation, I was like, I should go see where that figure came from. And it was a study from like 1993. And I'm like, oh man, I've been like citing this one study. And so I did a little bit more digging and I found a 2003 study that showed that there was a 50 to 65% non-adherence. And then a 2013 study that showed specifically low back pain, that there was a 50 to 70% non-adherence to home exercise programs. So that figure still is still relevant, and I feel a lot better about saying it now, but I just thought that was a funny story. There is, I believe, a massive opportunity that's left on the table in many settings in the physical therapy. And 1993 is not old, I agree. There's a massive opportunity that's left on the table, right? I think behavior change is really difficult to accomplish on your own. And I believe physical therapists and other, strength coaches, clinicians are in a perfect position to help patients and clients with behavior change as it pertains specifically to lifestyle management. And of course, I'm talking about the method and tool of choice as motivational interviewing, which I think you guys will see like as we continue, that it is a really good tool of choice. It takes a leap of faith, like I said earlier, and a lot of practice to get good, but I don't think it takes a lot of practice to get started. So mastering motivation interviewing, I believe, is going to help you, if you choose to do it, stand out from your peers in the clinic and other colleagues, because you'll be able to help patients in a way that I don't think is widely used in the clinic right now, right? You're going to be able to help them with proper nutrition, sleep hygiene, mindfulness, and exercise without fear of being out of your scope of practice. Because as you'll learn, and as you guys already know, people are coming up with their own solutions. So I don't need to be, right? I'm not diagnosing and treating nutrition conditions, right? Obviously. And each state has its own practice act in terms of nutrition and what falls under the scope for physical therapists. So you have to look into that as well. And I'm sure there are liability waivers and things people would need to sign. But I've coached around 100 clients over 4 years in nutrition specifically. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, most of them were signing commitments for 9 and 12 months. So I worked with people for quite a bit of time. And over the course of working with these people, I've noticed like the conversations are all pretty similar, right? And if all the people are leading their own conversations, I very rarely tell people that they need to eat fruit and vegetables. Like, that's not something that I have to tell people, right? And so it's really much more about skills and things like that. And we all know nutrition, sleep hygiene, all that plays a role in rehab. So while like a lot of people call them soft skills, I would say they're arguably the most important piece to the puzzle because if you can't guide your patients to do their home exercise program, then you might find them, or they might find themselves in that perpetuate cycle of like rehabilitation potentially, right? Context is king, of course. On top of that, like people need to be ready, willing, and able, as Chris said, to make a change. So that's also, you know, that piece of the puzzle. Before I continue on like what I'm going to talk about, does anybody have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I do online strength and conditioning coaching too, and some of the habit building stuff is part of my coaching practice. And you know, you ask someone, or you know, if you think about yourself, you're like, is there anything in your day-to-day routine that you would like to change? Everyone can list off one or two things, and that's a great place to start. Of like, hey, I want to drink more water. Hey, I don't want to go, you know, I want to go to bed before midnight, whatever it is. I found that question has gotten a lot of success, or has had a lot of success with kind of building a relationship with the person, and also having them be the one that kind of starts that whole process and says, yeah, I would like to change this. And then me kind of coming in and being that, okay, here's, I think, an easy way to take the next step, and then building from there. I found a lot of success with that.
Yeah, and the thing is like, I noticed you didn't say I start the motivation interviewing process start to finish, and now I have clients making changes. You just added an extra open-ended question, right? So I think there's this idea that motivation interviewing has to be this engagement process, this this focusing session. It's going to take 30 minutes. Like, you just ask one simple question to plant the seed, and like, you're going to have, as physical therapists and coaches, you're going to have multiple contacts with these people. So it's like, this is one of the reasons why I think you don't need to be a master at MI, you know, to be able to begin to enact or guide somebody through some change.
And I was just going to say that motivational interviewing is pretty sneaky, or it can be sneaky. I would just remember a conversation I had with Andy probably just a couple of months ago. And I was just talking about how I kind of got into this bad habit of eating poorly. And then, you know, probably 5 minutes in the conversation, I hear Andy go, so on a scale of 1 to 10, and I went, oh, you know, I was like, oh, I know what you're doing now. So, you know, obviously I knew about it just because we kind of learned about it in class, but to a patient, client, anyone like that, like for them, it's just a conversation to have, and just a couple of good questions, and they're on their way to making some good changes. So it can be a really, really good skill to have.
Nice. Yeah, that was funny you brought that up, because I forgot. But yeah, I just was like, this is the other thing. If you start to read up on MI, you start to learn how to use it, you will find ways to get reps. And Alex started talking about exercise and how he wasn't, you know, or not, he was talking about nutrition or eating right and things like that. And I was just curious in nature, because MI puts you into this seat where you're like, if I just am curious enough, I don't have to think or like memorize which questions to ask. I can just ask curious questions, and as long as they're open-ended, they're going to lead somewhere. And once you find out and learn how to do some of that stuff, you will find ways to get reps in your, you know, everyday life. You know, when my mom's like, I need to make it to the gym, I'm like, perfect opportunity to practice some of this.
Andy, what about, so I've been trying to MI my sister, which has gone good and bad. So like, she'll talk to me about like tons of things, and I'll never really answer her question. I'll just be like, well, what do you think you should do? Or something like that, or just repeat back what she said. And she hates it, because she's like, I feel like you're interviewing me, or I feel like you're not giving me an answer. Like, how do you find that line between, especially when we become PTs, like you have to have this kind of this role as a quote unquote expert. You do have to provide guidance. When do you find that like they're becoming frustrated with you not actually giving them like explicit like things that they may want? Have you ever had that challenge, or with like nutrition things?
Yeah. So, oh man, I could go a couple different ways with this. briefly, without like diving into, you said she's talked about a lot of things. Can you think of one example that you've kind of tried to MI her on and like something she's wanted to change?
A lot of like guy stuff. She's
Mm.
just been like, what do you think I should do about, and then it was like her current boyfriend. I was like, what do you think? Like, what do you think you should do? How are you feeling about it? And she's like, I literally am asking you. And so it's like, it doesn't make
Okay, so that's tough, and this is something I learned earlier on in my relationship. This is for all the guys out there. If you've got a significant other and they're asking for advice or they're venting, you have to immediately ask, do you want me to solve a problem, or do you want somebody to talk to or vent to? Because at some point, she straight up told you, I want like advice, and she's giving you permission to give advice. And that's one of the principles of MI, is like, you have to ask permission before you can start providing information and advice. So I think relationships are an awesome example, because girlfriends will get together, and I think John Berardi from PN gave this example, but he was like, girlfriends get together and they're like, you need to really dump that guy, he's a big jerk. And then the other girlfriend's like, yeah, but he can be really nice sometimes. And it's like a classic example of like ambivalence, right? When you want to change something but you don't, right? She values something else different than how she's acting. So in your example, like I said, you have to test Alec. It's not the nail. Okay, we have to link that. Alec, your job is to go find that video and link it to everyone, because it's hilarious. But yeah, man, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, you have to at some point position yourself in the conversation to say like, I have some ideas. Is it okay if we go through some of them with your permission? You know, just straight up ask them. Does that help?
That's great.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments before I move on to the next talking point? Sweet. So a quick, everybody knows MI, but a quick definition for anybody that doesn't. It's like a collaborative dialogue with a person who wants to change, and the dialogue is purposely designed to look for personal motivations by exploring their own reasons for change under this umbrella of like being unbiased and compassion and showing empathy and acceptance. And so like I said, it's widely used in the psychology field, and I see it as this like crazy word ninja game. Like as Alex said, you can really sneak in such a short amount of time some seeds and plant some seeds for change. In order to really understand kind of the beginning of when you would want to implement MI, you have to understand the stages of change rather. And it starts from pre-contemplation and it goes all the way to maintenance. So real briefly, I'll run through them. As pre-contemplation is when somebody has no desire to change, and they might not even be aware. It's not on the radar. Classic example is, I'm here because my doctor told me to. Like we hear that in the PT clinic probably a lot. Like they're just like, right? But the shining light is they showed up. So there's at least you can start to work with them, right? Contemplation is they're aware of the change and it needs to be made, but they have mixed feelings. Like my doctor says I need to eat better, and he's right. I'm just always running late, or I forget to eat breakfast in the morning. So they've identified that there needs to be a change, and they kind of are aware, but they're still kind of uncertain or showing that ambivalence, which I'll get into like the definition of ambivalence here in a bit. Preparation means they now have the awareness from contemplation, and they have a strong desire, and they're considering on how they might go about it. So I'm planning to wake up earlier so I can eat breakfast. That's an example. Action is they're actually expending physical energy to carry out the task. So I wake up 20 minutes earlier every day to make sure I get breakfast. And then maintenance is they're doing that physical action for at least 6 months. And so you have to know the stages of change, because it's just like an exercise. Like if you are trying to progress somebody with certain behaviors, like you have to know where they're at in this change progression, which is non-linear. They could be in contemplation one day, back to pre-contemplation. It kind of just varies. And so MI is designed to guide people from contemplation and preparation to action. So if they're in pre-contemplation, it's almost like wasted energy, right? Does anybody have any comments about those?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, you kind of just answered it there, but like, I guess, so you would say that, what was the first stage again? I'm sorry,
No, it's all right. It's pre-contemplation. So they're not
Okay.
even aware that they want to make it.
So that client that shows up because their doctor said, I got to be here, do you think would you say then that they're one open-ended question away from being in that next stage, and they probably know either consciously but they're not saying it, or subconsciously, that they do have a problem or something that needs to be changed, and they're just the right question or the right, I guess, empathy towards them away from sharing that and being a little bit more open about that?
Yeah, I mean, I stole this from Paul last week, but context is king, right? So if somebody comes in that, if they're a recent or they've got like chronic pain, right, and they're like, well, my doctor won't prescribe me opioids, like fingers crossed, and they go, you got to go to physical therapy, and they show up and they're like, I'm just here because my doctor said so. You might ask an open-ended question about what they know about chronic pain. What do they know about how physical activity impacts chronic pain? Like getting them to, by asking opening questions, getting them to start to discuss their current understanding of where they're at might lead to, oh yeah, I've heard walking every day might, like, you have no idea until you start to ask. And I think that's what's like amazing about the principles of MI, is it just kind of, if you've always got those principles in the back of your mind, yeah, it's very possible somebody might be like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to do X, like, and then you're kind of, now you've taken away that unaware piece. Does that answer your question? I don't think it's like a perfect equation either. Like it's very sticky, and the thing is people who are expressing ambivalence, it's a really uncomfortable feeling because they're in contemplation now. They know they need to make some changes, but they're like, I don't know why I'm not doing it. And it's really uncomfortable. So sitting with that uncomfortableness, sometimes it goes a long way.
But along your lines, Andy, with somebody in chronic pain, oftentimes they've actually tried certain things. They may have even had therapy multiple times before, and that repeated failure, right? So now they're really up against it just because they're tired of failure. So I don't want to move into that forward. I'd rather just be kind of acting like I don't know what the hell's going on, simply because every time I try to take control, I've failed. And so really there's no controls. And so sometimes just, what have you tried, and asking some of those questions about that, so that you can walk them through and go, so we know we're not spending the same time doing the same things, or where were those friction points for you? And then getting that kind of stuff so that you can help guide that where you've seen where they failed before, because so oftentimes it is these people have actually tried multiple things and failed before, and they don't want another failure, right? They just feel already beat up by failure.
Andy, how do you differentiate between, let's say, like, and this is very vague, but like a routine encounter with a physician or healthcare provider? Like, how do you differentiate between that, a quote unquote normal interaction, compared to an MI session? Do you think they're really, or a clinician who leads and has questions or interactions based off kind of MRI principles? Is it really like the open-ended format? And is it really like the diving deeper into the why and like the those principles? Like, what do you think the biggest difference is between like two clinicians, that one knows about MI and the other who doesn't?
Yeah, that's a good question. At first I thought you were asking about like a physician doing it. So you're asking, like, if you got two clinicians, one practices MI and then one doesn't, and how's the conversation going to be different?
Yeah, like let's say you have one who maybe is a really nice person, their patients like them, they're very like, they can connect with them and they're listening, like they're still a really great individual and a great clinician, but they don't know some of these skills. What's the huge difference there?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference is, right, being able to listen for change and sustain talk, first of all, which I'll explain in a bit. But if somebody has now expressed a desire to change, right? They're like, hey, I've always wanted to start psych. I'm trying to think of a good example. Hey, something that's maybe not exercise specific, but hey, I've heard sleeping better. I've read it's really good for recovery, and like I'm going through this ACL reconstruction, and like I'm 2 months in, and like I heard that's really good, right? So that's kind of like change talk. Like you can kind of infer that maybe they're trying to get more sleep. So the clinician who is experienced with MI might say, like, explore that. Whereas the person who isn't experienced with MI might say, oh, I've got this awesome pamphlet that says like all this awesome information about why sleep's important, and you should just get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And now what they've done is they've taken the person from an active role to a passive role. So, and that's one of the principles like of MI. You gotta keep that person in an active role. You gotta put them behind the driver's seat. So if somebody is like, I'd like to increase the hours of sleep I get, you need to explore how they might go about that, what barriers they're already experiencing, why they haven't done that. Like, you know, and then you might go down the rabbit hole of what skills they need to work on to get to that action phase. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and that's kind of my thoughts about it, because when I've seen coaches or clinicians who understand or PN principles or just motivational interviewing, a lot of it's like, as you said, they understand those big statements or thoughts that patients have, and they can kind of like, they have a direction of where to go of asking for their questions, or knowing kind of how you said what phases of change they're in.
I think some of that should just be a natural curiosity, but oftentimes you're so wrapped up in, I've got to put this into a human being instead of draw it out of a human being, right? And so oftentimes we've got our knowledge and we want to impart that knowledge into a human being, but if they're not wanting that, or if they're not at a point where they're going to be accepting of that, we're really just wasting our breath. And that's a lot of why there's so much failure on home exercise program. We haven't anchored it to a meaningful cause. We haven't shown them where it is, and we haven't seen what barriers they are. We just say, here's this sheet of paper, or go look online for these videos, and you're supposed to do that, and it's going to make you well, but we haven't anchored it to anything, right? And so going through and just being curious. So what is this? What are you able to do? Oh, you've got young kids playing around in your house. So how can we turn playing into I think just being curious is part of it. I think the skill really comes in, and as I said, good questions. What are those really kind of leading questions without being obvious, right? And that's the kind of thing, is those good questions really are where the skill set, I think, is refined and honed in the practice.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's also difficult to just like look at every scenario and be like, this is how I would like MI. It's this ebb and flow. I mean, imagine somebody asked that question as they're leaving the clinic. You're not going to be like, hey, let's spend 5 minutes trying to MI you before you go. But it really, what allows it, you know, to do, and I envision physical therapy clinics being able to follow up with patients about lifestyle management outside of the clinic, right? Like that should be an added feature of care. Like, so I'm obviously still a student, so like taking it from like, yes, I've had a lot of practice with MI, but doing it in the clinic when you're thinking about the 15 minutes, you need to be prepared for the next patient. Like I don't have that experience, and Paul and anybody else that's still here who's a practicing clinician might be able to chime in, but it's not going to be easy. But I think if anything, if you take away from today a desire to go learn about the principles of MI, you will be already well on your way, above and beyond some of colleagues that you might run into.
Well, I think the whole thing really is being curious and asking questions. To Chris's earlier question, the difference would be somebody who's just informing and constantly telling a patient things versus somebody who's asking things. To me, that's the biggest difference, right? Now, ideally, your skill sets grow as you learn motivational interviewing, and so you have more precise questions, right? So you're really getting a little more at the meat of things. But the reality is the difference is going to be somebody who's asking versus telling, and that's going to be the biggest thing. Whatever it is, it should be constantly so what do you know about this? And what are your thoughts about this? And how are you able to implement that? Or what are your struggles with this? And getting down that line while you're having a move. It's not we're going to sit down and just have a talk, right? I mean, that's in the clinic. You don't have that luxury of always just being able to break out. You might have somebody doing something here and you've got this. And so you have to be able to have these interventions and these discussions on the fly. And so it really is about just being curious of who they are and what their struggles are and what that kind of stuff is, and giving them that autonomy to just speak to it, own it. And, like this morning I had a guy that's why I'm all dressed up. He knows he needs to sleep. So we're having a discussion about that, but he's still exercising and doing things, but he's not quite ready to change. He's got little kids. They disturb the whole sleep cycle anyhow. And he's like, it's just not the time for me. But we go through those conversations while we're actually doing things, right? You can't just kind of stop and have this discussion. You've got to be active.
Yes. No, thanks for that input, Paul. I mean, yeah, it's really nice to have like insight from somebody who's in the clinic and practicing that. I'm going to move on to talk about ambivalence. I know it's been an hour or so. I mean, I could talk about this all day, but I want to get through ambivalence and then a demonstration at least. So ambivalence is this conceptual weird thing where John Berardi says, from Precision Nutrition, he says it's this thing where you want to do something but you don't. And ambivalence is something that somebody will experience if they are in the contemplation phase, where they've been made aware of a change that they want to make, but they're not quite sure how to go about it, or they're on the fence about wanting to go about it. So a quick example in my life is I currently live with my fiance in Madison because of the COVID crisis, right? I go to school in U of M Flint, as most of the people here know, and we've been mostly doing on and off distance for a while. She has a work schedule where she has Thursday and Friday off, which means Wednesday night is her Friday night. And we enjoy drinking beer and wine, occasionally maybe some tequila, and just enjoying each other's presence and things like that. And because we don't have that luxury outside of this COVID pandemic. That said, I value sleep and waking up early. I am the type of person that if I don't work out in the morning, it's really unlikely that I'll work out in the afternoon. So I'll be like, I'll get 8 hours, right? And I'll try to wake up at 5:30 or 6:30, maybe 7:30. But either way, depending on what time I go to bed, I'm like, I value sleep, right? And most of the time I do it. But come Wednesday night, dozens of times I've told Catherine, hey, I'm going to go to bed at 9 or 9:30. And when time comes around, it's, way past 9:30, it's 10:30, 11:30, 12, like we're having a glass of wine, like whatever, hanging out. And all this to say, I wanted to do something, but I don't. And when you evaluate it or kind of reflect, turns out, and this isn't super obvious to me, but I value spending time with her more than I want to do something, but I don't. So I want you guys to think about your own example of ambivalence and think about a time in your life when you're feeling ambivalent about something. And when you think about that, think about all the uncertainty maybe and the frustrations and the challenges that you have in your life, and hold on to those as I continue here to talk about, like, those are also the same frustrations and challenges and uncertainty that patients and clients will have when they go to seek health and fitness advice. And so until you can appreciate this feeling and understanding of ambivalence, you might just be assuming things about people. And like, this is where I think fat shaming and discrimination against people who are challenged with obesity comes into play, because the odds are already against them, right? We got advertising and marketing of unhealthy foods that are in our, pervasive in our society. If you also consider like social determinants of health outcomes, on top of that, and our country prides itself on the hustle, so people are staying up later. We're the only mammal or animal on this planet that forgoes the natural urge to go to sleep, which is super weird and interesting if you think about it. So next time, now that you understand ambivalence, like next time that you have a patient or client and you're like, why don't they just do their home exercise program like we talked about, right? And it's because potentially, right, when people have difficulty changing, it's really a person problem, and it's usually a situation problem. And so it's really common for practitioners and healthcare providers to look at people who are obese and think they're being difficult or lazy, right? But try to reevaluate the situation. So, does anybody want to share the ambivalence they might have been thinking about? Asking for a volunteer? Okay, keep thinking about it. I'm gonna move on. You guys keep thinking about it. But with people have ambivalence, how do we help those people, right? Normally, because we're like naturally resistant to being told what to do. Think about like a time when you had something on your agenda that you needed to accomplish, but you like weren't quite sure about how to go about it yet. You were kind of really working up to accomplishing it. You maybe even had it planned out, and then someone tells you, hey, you need to go do this thing, or you should do this thing. You're going to be like, hell no, right? Like, this might pertain more to the guys here, but like when your mom tells you you need to go get a haircut, and maybe you were already thinking about getting a haircut, but as soon as she tells you, you're like, I'm not getting a haircut. Like, just don't tell me what to do. So with your piece of paper, I want you to write down the first word of the sentence that, the first verb that I am going to explain here in a second. So like when a person comes to express the need or desire to change, like traditional methods, like, so you're going to write explain. When I say we might explain to them why they need to change, so you'd write explain. Another example is we might advise the person to change, so you're going to write the word advise. So we might warn the person what might happen if they don't change. We might say, hey, if you don't change, like your health is going to continue to deteriorate, right? So far you should have the words explain, advise, warn. And as we continue, you might suggest to somebody how they might go about change. You might suggest, hey, why don't you just get more sleep? You might direct them or tell them why they should quit smoking or why they should lose weight. Hey, you need to quit smoking. You might disagree. Somebody might be like, I've lately been talking a lot about the keto diet, but some people might be like, I love the keto diet. And your evidence-based mind be like, I disagree. It's not good for your heart. It might put you in ketogenic acidosis. It's whatever. You might analyze, right? You might look at what they're doing and you might say like they're being lazy, right? You might try to analyze their behaviors. You might reassure them, right? You might say, hey, you can do it. Like you might be a cheerleader. So looking at your paper, you should have explain, advise, warn, suggest, direct, disagree, analyze, and reassure. And so this is super normal. This is like what people do. And when that one practitioner Chris mentioned where he's not super MI informed, he might fall into one of these categories when somebody says, hey, I want to eat more protein or something. I'm going to come back. Does anybody think about any ambivalence that they have thought about? Maybe it's a change that they want to make. They're uncertain about. Maybe they want to study more. Maybe they want to sleep more. Don't make me say Bueller a couple times.
Okay. I mean, mine is simple. I need to sleep more. I know I need to sleep more, but I've developed habits based off of being available to my kids when they're doing their homework, right? And so like when he's doing calculus or he's doing any of those kind of things when they were in high school, and while they're in college now, I still have those late night habits, that other kind of stuff, right? But if I'm thinking and active late, I don't shut down. So it may be 3 o'clock in the morning and then I'm still up at 6 or 7 in the morning, right? And so those kind of behaviors I know are not good long term, but my ambivalence is that's almost who I am now. That's my identity. That's my this, right? And early it was because I valued being the parental, right? Now it's just, now I have to be forced to change and be something different and do something different. And I've kind of carved out this nice little evening time frame where it's just me doing my thing instead of, again, now I'm going to have to figure out how to make time for wife when I already have it carved out. Now, how do I rebalance things? And so that rebalancing, you just look at it and go, it's easier just to stay where I am. It's actually not healthy.
Right. Thank you, Paul. Actually, I was just going to end the call right now if nobody volunteered. You value sleep, you know the importance of sleep, but there time that you would like to address. And so sleep. I'm going to ask for more volunteers. Now, the entire class, please, using the sheet of paper in front of you, we're going to try to make Paul sleep more. Okay? So we might say, Paul, you know what's going to happen if you don't sleep, right? People who get less sleep die earlier, right? Please, people, unmute yourself and help Paul change.
I'm overwhelmed with caring.
I'm just start calling on people. Robbie.
Oh man, I only got like 5 of your words written down because I was just watching you.
Okay, pick one.
All right, I'm gonna go with explain. So Paul, explain to me why that nighttime self-time is so important to you in your life.
It's undisturbed time, so I can get deep work done, and it's time where I'm not feeling that I have to pull away from family, right? So it's my own little bubble of time, and I could shift that to the morning, but now I'm disrupting the wife when I'm getting up early. I'm doing this stuff, my workout, yeah, all those other kind of things. So it's just a time that's just carved and easy to maintain.
So I'll interject real quick. What I meant to say was, Robbie, you would explain to him why sleep is important, right? And then somebody might suggest to him like how to get more sleep. Somebody might, right, disagree with him. Hey, family time is not important. Like, don't do that. Nobody do that. But you see, kind of understand now.
I do.
Oh, I feel bad. I called you out.
Somebody else.
You know, he'll sleep when he's dead. He's got plenty of time.
Yes, thank you. Exactly, right? So these are, right, we might analyze why he's, or reassure him, like I said. We might say, hey, it's okay, you'll try to get more sleep next week, or like all of this puts them into a passive role, right? And Precision Nutrition has this crazy statement, right? They say, any client or patient resistance to change that you're experiencing is your fault. And when they say that, people are like, it's not my fault that Paul's not getting enough sleep. Like, I'm not there to like tell him to go to bed. But they describe it as hugging the cactus. Would anybody here hug a cactus? Like, raise your hand. I wouldn't. Hugging the cactus, right, is when clients and patients push back, they actually push harder because they have something to push against. So hugging the cactus, the harder you hug the cactus, or the harder you tell Paul that I disagree, that you need to be getting more sleep, the more likely he's probably not going to change anything. So this is another. Well, does anybody want to make a comment about that before I move on to the demonstration?
Just to clarify, you're saying that like 8 of those common verbs are things that put the patient or the client into a passive role, and things where it takes you as the authority and it may have more of a backfire than an actual helpful change.
Yes. Yeah. No, thanks for clarifying that. Exactly. Right. If one of the principles of MI is to make sure that the person is in an active role, you just telling them what they should do or suggesting or advising is going to do the opposite. So yes.
I would say, Andy, that even if they seem to progress, these are the people that if we have them passive and we've just educated, they can't go into maintenance. They never maintain because it's not theirs. They have no ownership. It was, well, that was a trial, and then it's easy to throw that away because it didn't come from an intrinsic, it came from the extrinsic. And so that's oftentimes where we see a lot of people fall out, even if they are able to, because they've already said, I want some change. I'll use your tool or whatever it is to get there. But it's not their tool. It didn't fit with their world. It doesn't work on their triggers. It doesn't do those things, and they can't ever maintain.
Right. That's the self-determination theory, right? Where it's either intrinsic or extrinsic motivations. And if it's extrinsic, it's less likely, like you said, go out into maintenance. And it doesn't really help promote autonomy and self-efficacy, right, Chris? the buzzwords, right? Self-efficacy. Do they have the confidence to carry out a specific task? If they don't pick the task, they're probably not going to have that great of self-efficacy. So I wanted to do a demonstration of MI, and we might end with that. I've got a lot more to talk about, but I can keep going if people are interested after the demonstration. But because it's 11:10, I'd like to spend, 5 to 10 minutes with somebody who filled out the survey and would like to participate with a change behavior in their life that they've been wanting to change recently.
Make me go to sleep early.
Yeah. Okay. I can't make you do anything. Okay, Paul. So we're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes discussing this sleeping change that you've already pointed out that you wanted to make. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Okay. Do you, if at any point in this you feel kind of uncomfortable sharing, like only share what you want to share with me, obviously. So you had kind of already mentioned a few things about why sleep is important to you, but I'm just going to have you reiterate them again. So can you tell me what is it about sleep that's important to you, that like why do you want to make this change?
Well, I know long-term health is to that. I work out consistently, and I think it impacts my workout recovery. When I'm sleep deprived for multiple days in a row, my workouts suck. I tend to get those little nagging injuries, and mental clarity kind of starts to go away. Right? Why we have a paper that we looked at that says that it's definitely a personal bias, whether you believe in what I call if we have to make too many decisions, we get decision fatigue, or just that personal fatigue of trying to have self-control. I definitely feel different when I'm sleepy. I don't have the same controls, right? So whether that's a personal, one of those things that I do or not, but when I'm sleep deprived, I tend not to have the same health behaviors. It's easy to choose other things where I might have a little more resilience to a challenge coming up. When I'm sleep deprived, I don't.
Yeah, it sounds like you are looking at it, the long-term benefits of getting adequate, consistent sleep. You've talked about how like it affects your recovery, right? Mental clarity is a big piece of it for you. You can just kind of tell when you don't get enough sleep. You're also really educated on the topic, it sounds like, so that's something that you looked into and it's important to you. What is it about not getting enough sleep specifically that might be, if you got more sleep, like how would your life be different if you had this change?
Again, I think I'd have more resilience to challenge, just like the decision fatigue of day-to-day owning a business, doing those things, trying to keep things clear in my head. My recovery and my workouts would be different. And so I think I'd have more vibrance in life and be a little more astute in my day-to-day.
Good. Yeah. Can you, since you already mentioned all that, so that's really good. I think you have a good firm grasp on why sleep's super important. Can you describe to me your current like layout of your day-to-day, like your sleep habits, essentially?
Sure. Been trying to build a routine, but my routine right now consists of whenever I finish work after my late hour bubbles is winding down with Netflix, typically a documentary that has somebody that's talking monotone, right? But if it's too cool of a subject, I end up, another 3 hours later and I'm into it.
So you, before bed, most nights you're watching Netflix?
Yes.
Okay. What does your routine look like in the couple hours before bed?
Totally shitty, because it's working right up until I determine that I need to okay, it's getting real late. I'm not having the efficacy in what I'm doing. So I need to go try to wind down. And then that's when I go use Netflix, which I know the blue light is not good. I know, I can go through all the negatives in that behavior process, but that's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. This is like, I don't have to like present to you why sleep is important. It's very obvious that you already have a good firm grasp on that. You are really dedicated to your work though. So in the couple hours before bed, you're still working. So that seems important to you. Is there anything else that you feel like prevents you from sleeping more or looking at this from a different angle?
I've had since I was young bouts of insomnia, right? It's my mom has it. And so we really just, there's times where I don't go to sleep well. And so if I try to go to bed early, like you said, 9 o'clock, when I go to bed at 9 o'clock, I'm typically up at 1 o'clock, right? Because my body's like, oh, 4 hours, we're good. And then it may be a couple hours and then I'll go to bed and then I'm up at 7, right? So I get a 4-hour little thing and then a 2-hour nap instead of a full night's sleep. That frustrates me. And so I'm like, screw that. I just don't want to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I'm trying to get a night's sleep, not 2 naps.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it sounds like insomnia is something that you've experienced, and then it runs in your family a little bit. I'm curious. This is going to be a pretty crazy question. I got 2 questions that are really crazy. Right. First, what is good about not changing your sleep routine?
Ease. It's a habit that's already there, right? And habit change is difficult, and habit change requires other people in my environment, and it requires me to change my environment to a degree, right? I know I need to have different triggers. I know I need to have some different things set up to help start the initiation process of, hey, it's 9 o'clock, time to go to bed, or start winding down these things and putting things in process to get me ready to go to sleep. And right now, what's here has worked, right? It's been working for me, not long-term health-wise and some of the other ways, but I can kid myself that it's working, because if you look at the efficacy of those last few hours, it probably sucked, right? I could have probably got in those 2 hours done in 45 minutes if I was fully focused and attuned, but you start to get fatigued and a little fogged, and I think I reread that article twice already, type stuff. And so that kind of shit starts to happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but it's just ease for right now.
Yeah. Sounds like it would be too difficult to maybe disrupt the whole system if right now in the short term.
That's the fear, right? Whether that's real or not, I don't know, but that's the fear, is if I have to do all that, right?
Right. So the second crazy question is, what would be bad about change? Like, what would be bad about getting more sleep?
If I was able to get more sleep and set up the constructs, just the difficulty of getting there, because I think everything else actually works out in the wash and gets better.
Yeah, help me understand that again.
Okay. So, I mean, other than having to go, the only thing bad about getting more sleep is just having to put the constructs in place, right? So what's my habit? What's my set? What's putting together the pattern of life that's allowing me to do that? And then getting through those nights that are going to be somewhat disrupted sleep for a while until my body gets the new rhythm, right? It's just that initial hurdle. Getting through that, I think everything else actually works out perfectly fine. And I actually am ineffective in those spans based off of the time we give it. If we compress it, I'll probably still get the same work done. I just am hesitant to get over that barrier.
Yeah. So it sounds like the barrier for you is in both instances, for both questions, it is constructing a new system.
Correct. Right.
I think like the quote that I learned recently in a podcast that I was like, I just keep throwing around everywhere now, is the system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets, right? So you don't want to disrupt the system right now, because I mean, the results you have, you're okay with them, but you have all these other implications in the background.
Right.
Yeah. So is there a time that you can, let me think about how I want to ask this question. Now I'm thinking about asking the question. Have you tried to get more sleep in the past?
Yes.
Can you describe to me about that experience, how it went?
I've tried to construct other mechanisms around this, right? So like say I want to go to bed at 9:30, right? So at 9, we're going to close up shop, do all this kind of stuff. I have a separate computer that I work on that's a work computer versus my personal computer, just so I can shut that off, right? But then it's right next to my personal computer, right? And so it's real easy to go over there or do something else, right? And so it was again, I think for me, the environmental changes or the environmental constructs, I try to control some, but I didn't have enough controls. And so I always found that, well, I can shut my work computer off, but then I'll check emails. Well, just 1 or 2 emails. And then I'm down a bunny hole chasing something or doing something else, right? I mean, It's real easy to get lost in that. And that's why for now I shut it off and then I leave the room before the other one is shut off and stuff. But then I'll go and watch Netflix to try to, calm my mind down, because I'm accelerated still thinking about things and perseverating on work things or other things that I'm doing rather than being able to do that.
Yeah. It sounds like you have like a pretty robust set of how do I want to put this? Like understanding of putting a system in place to set yourself up for success. It just sounds like this time around you tried a couple different things and it didn't work.
Right. Yeah, I'm aware of triggers. I'm aware of habit change and stuff. That's what I study, or that's what I do. But personally, that resistance to getting that system or getting the system just right? And sometimes I want perfect rather than just good, right?
Yeah.
And that's an impediment to me. Yeah, okay, I'll write down a system and go, yeah, but here's this trip or here's that. Instead of just solving that problem, I'm like, that one's not going to work.
What ideas, if any, do you have on a new system that you've maybe thought about, but you haven't really put into place?
Oh, I've got, I also like biohacking type stuff. And so Muse for meditation. I've got the blue locking lights so that I can, when I'm working, I have those. And so it's the blue light's not affecting me. I've got some of these things in place. I just haven't put them all together and see if that's an effective utilization of the new system. Because right now, again, like I said, it's easier not to do the change, even though I know there's the long-term. Again, long-term health typically doesn't give us an immediate, negative feedback. And so it's easy to stay with what is.
Yeah. Given the newer stuff that you want to try, or you've kind of set up into place, could you see yourself attempting to organize those in a way to prepare for bed, or is it more like something that's helping you while you sleep?
No, I mean, it's both to make sure that I fall asleep, but I need to have, I think, right, based off of all the readings, I need to have multiple triggers and multiple steps in my sleep hygiene to get me to wind down, to shut the brain off, because I typically am working up till a certain time. I just don't know how, it takes me a couple of hours to wind down. So I'd have to stop working at 7, right?
Yeah.
Well, that just doesn't seem enough time to me to get things done, right?
Yeah.
But if I could make it a 30-minute wind down that actually was effective, that's why I've gone to some of the technologies to see if that can compress that time frame a little bit, and then putting them in place to see if that allows me to actually get a full night's sleep without too many nights of the little cat naps throughout. If I could do that, I think I might get over that hurdle. It's just I haven't pulled that trigger yet, because again, what's working seems to be working, at least in the short term.
Yeah. So you've described that you have a list of things that you want to try. You understand that you can do them in the time leading up to when you go to bed, but it's difficult because you need a few hours so far in your experience, right? And that would be challenging. You're really diligent about coming up with the solutions. So I'm curious, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being 100% certainty, a new system.
I'd say probably 70 or 7. 7. Yeah.
What made you want to pick 7 instead of 6 or 8?
Well, 8 sounds a little too high based off of the efficacies that I've seen based off of my other things. A 6 or a 5 is a little bit low, because I'm trying to be optimistic in my mindset of what these things can do for me and in the time frame that I'm trying to do. It's just a matter of putting these constructs in place and then doing that over time. And right now, just haven't. I mean, my kids are still home once they go back to college.
Yeah.
So that they can study online. It makes no sense to me. But, once they go back to college, then maybe that's when I'm going to try some of these things, because I won't have any other disruptions or any of these other kind of things going on.
Okay.
At least that's my excuse.
So what would have to happen for you to get to an 8?
I mean, I think once I no longer have the fallacy, and it really is that the kids being home and all that kind of stuff will impact the way I'm going to do it. Because if I go to bed early and they're up playing video games and yelling and screaming or doing whatever the hell, right, then it's going to impact me because I'm light sleep at the beginning of sleep, right? So once I get some of those, some of those obstacles that are fake in my head out of the way, then I think that I'll be able to put that together and move up to maybe an 8.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like it's kind of like this time barrier. You're kind of waiting for your children to go back to school so you can sit down to construct a new system.
Correct.
So do you mind if I go over an idea that I might have and just see if that's something you want to play around with?
Let me know.
So it sounds like you're waiting for the right time to create a list, like maybe even like a tiny schedule. Is that right?
Yep. More to pull the trigger on the schedule than actually create, because I think I have an idea of what I want schedule-wise. I think it's just a matter of that's when I'm going to pull the trigger and try to initiate those changes.
Okay. Sometimes like we feel like we need to go from 6 hours of sleep to 8. So in your mind, what would be an improvement?
If I could get a solid 6, that would be a huge improvement.
Okay, yeah. So I like this idea of, shout out to Amy York again, this idea of, she says that a lot in lectures, this idea like you only need to make like 1% improvements over time. So it's hard for me to say if this is like, it's got a little bit of like insomnia pieces to it. Is it like a quality of sleep thing, or is it like I just don't lay down early enough to get sleep?
It's when I lay down, if I'm not asleep within like 15 or 20 minutes, I know it's going to be multiple hours or a whole night where I'm not going to sleep. Right. And so for me, I've got to be ready so that when I hit, it goes. Or
yeah. Have you considered looking into like a sleep study?
I've done a sleep study as far as like looking at whether or not so much as far as brain activity, but breathing and some of those other kind of things. And they gave me a diagnostic of trigeminy, which was like, okay, so and they said it took my sleep cycle seems to be about 139 minutes, right, for me to go through my normal sleep cycle and do some of these kind of things. I tend to take multiple hours at times, like on their tests, when they did the test and retest, to actually fall into a sleep, right? So that first little bit is just a much prolonged period of light sleep.
Okay, so it seems like you're kind of at this time where you might not be like super ready to make a change. So using the same scale on a readiness scale, like where would you fall on a scale from 1 to 10 to be ready to make a change?
Right now, probably at a 3.
Okay. Yeah. So that obviously makes things really difficult in terms of creating change right now. If somebody's, if you're not ready to make a change, which is okay and normal, then you're not ready. You're willing to make the change, but right now those aren't intersecting right now. So what in your mind might be the next step to prepare you to be ready?
As I mentioned, once the kids leave, right, then I know that I'll have a different control of my environment. And for me, I'm big on the environmental cueing and the environmental stuff, because I know who I am, and like, a book that's over there, I'll pick it up if I can't read, but then I can get lost, and then it's hours or hours later, right? And so for me, I have to control those environmentals a lot more. And I feel I can do that. And I think that's just a lie that I'm telling myself to kind of push it down kick it down the road a little bit. But I feel that I need that. And
when do the kids go to school?
2 weeks. Well, one actually goes this coming Wednesday, and the other one this weekend. We'll move him in, and then I'll have that. So a week.
Okay. How would it sound to follow up in 2 weeks?
Perfect.
and start to gauge kind of like your readiness and go from there.
Readiness and where I am and turning that mechanism on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I actually don't mind following up in 2 weeks. I think, thank you for volunteering. You were probably one of the harder cases that probably could have come out of this group. I was hoping somebody was like, I just want to drink more water. And I mean, this actually is a fantastic example about how somebody really just needs a soundboard to project the things that they've tried, that maybe like you might have potentially come up with new ideas, but you're so involved in understanding your own experiences right now with sleep that like, I didn't have to provide anything because you know more than I do actually. So it's kind of like, this is a classic example of, if I had just said, dude, get more sleep, you'd be like, screw this guy, I already tried. Like, right? So no, thank you for volunteering. Does anybody have any like right off the bat ideas or things that they want to comment on?
I really liked the 2 scales that you asked, especially the readiness one at the end, because once he said a 3, I think it was that immediate like, oh, well, that really says it all, right?
Right, like maybe I should have asked that earlier. Like,
well, yeah, I don't know, but like, I think the fact that you said you'd follow up in 2 weeks, the fact that you had that like 15 to 20 minute prelude to asking that question, he may like kind of think about that whole conversation within the next 2 weeks and maybe have a better concept of where he does want to start.
Right. I think if you ask that too early, you're not building that rapport so that when you do that follow-up 2 weeks, there's really no accountability, right? Because, okay, are you ready to change? No. All right, well then I'm out. You want me to see you in 2 weeks about what? Right? I mean, that kind of stuff. But when you've already shown that you care and you're asking questions and you're wanting to know where I am and what it is, and then you're finding that resistance and then, okay, how ready are you? Okay, but now here comes the accountability piece. I'm going to follow up in a couple of weeks when you should be able to be doing that, see where we are and what steps we can do, because now your window is possibly changed and for your readiness. So I think that was actually a well-timed question.
Cool. Yeah, I was just throwing it out there.
I also really liked the 2 questions you had about what is good about not changing your routine. Because when Paul, you were talking about like your Netflix routine, I mean, that sounds like extremely therapeutic for you. And like, who doesn't love Netflix before they go to sleep? So it's like almost in some cases, people would rather keep a shitty routine because it's almost like a de-stressor for the day than like the stress of trying to go to sleep 2 hours earlier. Because it like, you sounded like it would be so much more of a hassle to put those plans in place 2 or 3 hours prior than to just chill and relax and like take the load off the day, like cognitively. So I like that question a lot.
Yeah, with those 2 questions, what ended up happening was he had the same answer for both, which his barrier, I'm trying to recall, which was his barrier was, I was taking notes, but that it's just hard to change what he already likes about his routine. Or that it's just, he likes the ease of what he's already doing, rather. So what would be bad about changing? We don't ask that question. We don't ever get the opportunity for them to really think about what is it already that I like about my routine. And you might find people bring up a whole nother side of it where then you can start to identify their values, right? Because their actions are saying, I'm not getting enough sleep. And you're like, dude, get more sleep. And he's like, I value that downtime, perhaps. Or, he's saying like, I really like the 2 hours of Netflix, right? Because it's therapeutic, like you said, potentially there, Chris.
And then to add on to that scale point, I really like where you asked like, why isn't it an 8 or a 6? Because I think it's so easy to just say a number on that scale and not really reflect like, oh, could I actually be higher or lower on that? And then that other follow-up, I think with that same one of like, what would have to happen to get you to an 8 from a 7? Because that's like having them really self-reflect on like, oh shit, how can I bump that up? That was dope.
Yeah, and when you actually mentioned that, it made me think, we see this all the time with like the pain RPE scale or pain scale, where you can run into the same instances with this ready, willing, and able scale. And those usually come in threes, by the way. Ready, willing, or able. I didn't ask him if he's able to, because sometimes you can gauge with a person, like some people are, like if he had said he works 3 jobs, I would be like, well, how able are you? Right. But I didn't really have to, because it sounds like he's able to lay in bed at a certain hour. Like he's able bodied, like he has a bed, he's right, not homeless, and like all those things. Right. But with the 1 to 10 scale, with pain and RPE, you get people who are like 1, 10. You're like, okay, like I had the luxury of Paul, who really understands the scale. So he was like 3, and he knows and feels a 3, where you'll get people who are like RPE, like our virtual, the people who are U of M Flint people still here, our virtual geriatric patient or client, wellness client that we did last semester was a great experience. It was like a virtual session, kind of through Zoom actually. And she would get done with exercise and we'd ask her the RPE, and she always said 1. And we were like, well, 1 is like laying on the couch and she's like breathing heavy, and it's not, and we're like, are you, in my mind, I'm like, a 1? I'm like, that's like horizontal, like, and so if people don't understand the scale, you run into the same problem. So Chris, you're saying like, I really like the scale. I love it too, but just be aware of those same issues.
Andy, you go ahead, Robbie.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I liked that Paul was your subject, because it kind of really showed that there can be difficult cases, and that took almost 15 minutes, and you're obviously pretty versed in motivational interviewing, at least, you said you've been practicing. So it gives at least me as an idea and somehow some framework as how it would look in a clinic situation, that like this is something that needs to be practiced, and like I can't just read and listen and practice with my girlfriend. Like it's going to take a lot of skill, and I think that's important to understand as we continue clinical rotations and go eventually into the clinic, that I want to practice, and I think it can be valuable, but it needs to be practiced. That's what it looked like.
In the time constraints of the clinic, it really is, it's learning how to ask those questions and how to do that, but then be able to possibly, you've got this other client over here, right? Answer them and do some stuff here, and then come back and circle back in a continuous flow is where that honing and that refining is really going to put under the crucible, because it's a whole different time constraint.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, and that's a really good point. And I'll be very interested to see how my experience. I'm by no means a master at this. Chris keeps calling me a master, but when you compare, somebody who might not be super versed in it, I definitely have a little bit more experience, but not in the clinic. A couple of times within our 6-week full-time clinical, I was able to ask some questions about somebody who wanted to increase their exercise time, and she was on a bike, and that's where I got the idea. I was like, people can do MI with somebody who's warming up for like 5 minutes, and that's kind of snowballed into where we're at now. But to that point, I'm kind of excited at the end of my clinicals, and like I'll make it an active role in how I see patients, right? And I hope to kind of instill that in other students as well, if they feel like it.
Well, when you can, that warm-up time frame, especially if it's on a bike, because oftentimes we consider that to be throwaway time or one of these other kind of things, right? But you can also document in your monitoring for aerobic that it's staying aerobic because you're having a conversation. If they're able to converse, they're able to, I mean, there's ways to work that, and then just make sure that it's billable time while you're actually doing that, right? So people can't go, well, he's off talking, but he's not billing. No, I'm actually engaged in just monitoring for, making sure that we stay aerobic in this.
Andy, what are your thoughts on, because I know Paul mentioned kind of at the beginning of that conversation, like training is a big thing for him and recovery with training, and then like his cognitive load with like his resilience to probably work and clients or patients.
Oh yeah, man, I was like, man, I mean, that's a lot of variables and stuff. And so I while he identified sleep, and while I would probably agree with him, but I was just like thrown off guard. I was like, oh man, but go on.
Well, because of those sound like pretty big anchoring habits of like Paul will probably train no matter what. Am I right, Paul? Like that's probably a consistent habit. What are your thoughts on like anchoring the conversation to like, you know, that he's going to consistently like crush training. So you like revolve the conversation around how does sleep impact your ability to train? Because maybe like, it seems like he knows sleep is important, but he doesn't care that much. But for training, like that's somehow a continued habit. And so maybe like, what are your thoughts on having that full conversation go back to like the main point of what's more of a priority or something that he already has a habit towards?
Yeah, exactly. And that's definitely what you would approach at the 2-week revisit, right? So it's all about planting those little seeds and watching them grow as you continue to make contact with the person. And in Paul's case, as you continue to have more discussions, you're exactly right. Picking something that they value a lot and revolving the conversation around that is huge because it comes back to why it's important to them. And I realized I pointed at myself, but it's important to them. And a really good example is was supposed to be my mother-in-law, but COVID ruined our wedding plans. So, but my mother-in-law, soon to be, she has Parkinson's, right? And she wants to exercise more, and she has this hamstring issue, and she's young, she's like 61. She doesn't really want to, I don't know the expression that I'm trying to say, but she doesn't really want to like hang her hat up on like her hamstring issue being a Parkinson's issue, or she doesn't want to always address that she has Parkinson's, right? Because to her, it's a really difficult situation. I'm always saying, hey, you should go PT, right, for Parkinson's. But that conversation, because she decided she didn't want to do that at this point in her time, I kind of stopped saying you should go to PT because PTs are awesome at treating Parkinson's. I started saying, when she came up with this hamstring issue, I started saying, you need to go to PT to address this hamstring issue so you can keep playing tennis. She loves tennis. Like that woman plays like for 2 hours, 4 days a week. I don't know the intensity of it, but I've played tennis and it doesn't take much to be running, or, I don't know how much running around she has, but the point is she loves tennis. So I'm like, go to PT, get your hamstring fixed, and tell them you have Parkinson's and you might want to address some of that too. But I then revolved the entire conversation, and she actually made an appointment. She hasn't gone to it yet, but she's, it's been years I've been saying go to PT. So once I kind of was like, duh, I was like, let's just attach it to tennis. It made a difference.
I think that's a crucial point and if you can do it earlier, the better, I believe, as long as you've got the report. But anchoring to a short term, because a lot of the long-term health goals, they don't get an immediate benefit, right? I'm not going to see that my heart is healthy until, right, X amount of time or all this other kind of stuff. So those long-term changes, oftentimes, if we anchor to a behavior or to something that's short-term important, they'll actually see some viable changes earlier in those things. Like for me, okay, your abilities to focus and handle this, your abilities to work out without some of the nagging injuries, or your recovery is better so that you can get each one where you want it. Having those kind of anchors that are important to them, that give them a shorter term feedback, because those long-term habits, right, those long-term health changes that we're looking for, they're not going to necessarily get the feedback loop on right away, right? And so giving them a shorter victory window sometimes is helpful.
Yeah, no, I definitely think you hit the nail with that one. But do you have any examples by chance?
Of clients?
Yeah, where you end up getting them to focus on a short goal.
Well, yeah, I mean, I really anchor on what's important. It doesn't matter whether it's long-term change or not. Like I'm thinking of a lady that had bilateral total knee. She came in and says, well, I want to be able to walk. Sounds normal, sounds like a good goal, right? But what meaning is there in walking, right? So that's where you go, well, why do we want to be able to do that? Why do we, what really is, and we found out that she's actually going to be going on to a trip, a cruise, and she's going to be going to the Inside Passage, which I've been on and stuff. So you got to watch a lot of stairs to catch a can, right? And then we got to where she wants to be able to dance, and she actually wants to be able to dance in her heels. So now I have a very anchoring goal that's coming up in a short term, right? So it's not just walking for fitness, so because I'm a little overweight and that was bad on my knees. Now we've got something that's a real short-term goal that's anchored in something that's very meaningful, her trip, so she's grinding through and then extra set or this, I can go, remember what we want, right? Bring back in those important things. And then when she gets that, the habits that she's setting and working out will hopefully persist, right? Because she'll be able to continue to at the minimum walk, but I'm getting her high intensity stuff so that we can get it ready for this period. Those anchoring goals, I think, are so crucial. And that's where I use a lot of the kind of deeper questions on the whys and stuff, the 5 whys for patients on goals, because if I can't anchor something that's really meaningful when shit's going slow or it's really, really, sucking, it's real hard to get them motivated. But when you've got that anchoring point and they're like, well, how are you doing with your home exercises? Well, I only did it once out of this time. Man, I really need you to, because if we want to be able to get back to doing this, if you want to play on the ground with your grandkids and be able to get back up and do that, these things are things that are crucial to you, and you need to be able to do that. Having that anchoring system that way is it works.
Yeah, I think, do you feel like that's something that PTs it's kind of already like drilled into us that it's always got to focus back onto that?
I do think that it's drilled in, but I will tell you that it's not consistently applied at that level, right? So we're not finding the true motivational component. We're going, what's important to you? Oh, I want to be healthy, or I want to walk to be healthy. Well, why do you want to be healthy? Because I want a long life. Okay. It's this flippant thing, instead of going, really, what do you want? What's motivating you for that? And finding that deeper motivation, because some of these rehabs, like an ACL, okay, I want to get back to sports. Why do you want to get back to sports? We already know the athlete wants to get back onto the sport, but why? Well, if you get to the point where that's my only opportunity to go to college, right? Well, now there's a lot more riding on it, right? And you may not have known that, but now you're seeing a pressure, and there's going to be a psychological factor. There's all these other things. So if you can't find out what's anchoring a goal, a true goal. I mean, some of these kids come in, I want to get back to sports. And when you really dive in, no, mom wants them to still be able to play sports, right? I mean, there's all these other things. And if you're not spending a little time finding that anchoring thing, you miss a lot of who that person is in front of you, and you'll miss the ways to communicate and get get them to do the things that are necessary to meet that goal.
Yeah, I think this reminded me of when it comes to behavior change, there is this idea that there's a big kahuna and then there's a low-hanging fruit. If somebody is trying to make multiple changes, sometimes starting with the low-hanging fruit, I mean, it's the same with exercises, like what can somebody do right now, right? Start with the low-hanging fruit. You find that like being able to make small incremental changes with the low-hanging fruit might eventually lead to making bigger changes over like a longer period of time. I had an example of that in my notes later. One example, back to like precision nutrition, is they've coached over 100,000 clients the last time I looked, and it's been a couple of years, but they're super evidence-based. What's awesome is they are collecting data from these clients. And not only are they collecting data from their clients, they've allowed coaches like me to pay whatever fee to use their coaching platform, same curriculum, right? And it's 50 weeks. And what they, with permission of the client, get to take their data. So now all of a sudden they have their own coaching clients. Then all the coaches they coached their clients on this platform. So you're getting like, a lot of data, and they've gone through and they found that people who only complete 50% of the program, meaning there's biweekly habits and daily lessons. So they have to like click yes, they did it, or like respond to questionnaires and stuff like that. It's pretty involved, and I have some opinions on it, but not important right now. The important piece is people who only did 50% of the program still in a year saw a loss in like 10 pounds of weight, right? Now 10 pounds of weight is that they increased skeletal muscle mass, but lost body fat, or only lost body fat, or lost muscle as well. Like that's kind of hard to tell. But the idea that they spent a year doing only 50% of the program, but making small changes, still had massive results. If you think about it, how many times have you heard somebody say, man, if I could just lose 10 pounds, if I could just lose 10 pounds, and losing 10 pounds over a course of a year, probably going to stay off more permanently than the quick diets.
Crushed it, Andy. That was cool seeing that back and forth with you and Paul. I know it's not easy with a ton of people, and Paul's a hard case for sure because he's like already so kind of like cognitively aware of everything, where he, like, as you said, he already kind of knows what to do. Well, I guess, like, as you say, a lot of people, they know what to do, but there's that ambivalence. But with Paul, like, he's got the systems that he could have in place for sure.
Yeah, I have more talking points that kind of dives into why somebody, and to be a really good example of Paul, why somebody who has all the information and knowledge, but for some reason they're not executing it, right? And it goes back to those two independent systems of our brain, the emotional and the logical side. But I just feel like I'll only stay and keep talking about it if people want to. I just feel like we came to a good stopping point. If people want to jump ship, I totally get it. But one point I did want to make was my buddy John Flagg at Clinical Athlete and I have been talking about motivation interviewing a lot over the last few weeks, or 2 months, 3 months. And we kind of came to the conclusion that, all right, how well versed does somebody need to be in a particular topic to be able to effectively implement motivation interviewing? Meaning, as physical therapists, we might know more about exercise than the layperson. So that's like a already check the box there, but how much about nutrition do you need to know to be able to help somebody? And we kind of came to the conclusion that you'd have to be pretty well versed to steer the motivational interviewing conversation towards behaviors that kind of line up with what would be appropriate for nutrition. So while I feel like you don't need to be an expert, there is some level of understanding that you need to have about kind of like the background of a certain topic, I feel like. But at the same time, like I said, you don't need to be telling them what to eat necessarily. Does that kind of make sense?
I think so. Like you're not licensed to give, like, you're not a dietitian, but you can also help them navigate the waters of going in a better direction of healthier eating habits. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like if you haven't done enough reading on your own about the pros and cons of the ketogenic diet or the pros and cons of like the onus is like always on the clinician to understand like what they know about a particular topic if they're going to like teach somebody. So it's kind of like if you have a good understanding of both sides of an argument, like you're going to be well versed in somebody who just knows the pros or somebody who just knows the cons. And so it's kind of like there has to be some level of understanding, I think, to be able to help people, but I don't think it's as deep as you would think. And to your point, like somebody might say, like, I already want to improve or increase the amount of vegetables I get. Like, you don't have to tell them why vegetables are important, right? And things like that. So it's kind of a really simple example, but I may not be making sense at this point.
No, that makes sense. And also an example would be like sleep. Like none of us are sleep researchers, but we can still talk about like the importance of sleep with a rehab perspective or return to sport or whatever it is. So like, I guess you're saying you have to know enough to not be a dangerous individual and like do more harm than good.
Yeah, but like you might steer the conversation. Like if you know enough about nutrition, you know where you want to take them, right? In your mind, you're like, I want this person to eat 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. Like that's ideal potentially, right? I know I want them to eat a palm-sized serving of protein at every meal. But if you didn't know that information, you would just be kind of maybe in this like cycle of like just asking open-ended questions instead of having a place where you want to go in mind and trying to get them to get there on their own. Does that make sense?
I do think, but I think we as therapists in general have enough of the basic recommendations out there, right? And right. Many of these people that are coming, usually, unless you're seeking them out, right, are coming because they know something needs to change. What they know, they may not know what or whatever, right? But oftentimes in like I'm PN1, right? And so anybody that I've done that kind of stuff with for the coaching side, they kind of know what they need to do, right? They don't know how to get there from here. So oftentimes it's much more of finding what strategies they think would work for them, and then helping to do that more so than, okay, I mean, again, most of my people are people that are kind of barbell athletes or something else. So they're aware of, well, I need protein, I need this, I know X many grams per pound of this. So they're kind of already in tune with that. So it's somewhat of a different category because they're already there. But they know generally it's just how do I set a framework up, or how do I set systems up, or how do I do that? And I'm just asking, well, what things are going to work, what things aren't going to work, and why, and what are your restraints, and getting to some of those kind of things, which is a little bit different. But I'm not at a point like you, Andy, where, if somebody says I'm on a keto diet, all right, I'm not going to initially try to change them away from that, right? I mean, and my thing is, okay, so now we have a system in place, whatever that is, and then we know that we can make some moves that might be to a healthier thing, but that would be something that's happening way over time, not necessarily, okay, why the hell are you on a keto diet, or why, I mean, and those kind of things. I'm not going to engage at that same level. Intermittent fasting is really huge, right? All that kind of stuff. And then is that good or is that not good? How do we, why, what do we, those are things that you have to do a deep dive on if you want to be able to speak intelligently on. But just to get somebody a system, if they've already got a system, I like to start there and then try to move, again, low-hanging fruit, especially for diet or nutrition type stuff, picking those low-hanging fruit off.
Yeah, and one of the other things that John Flagg and I came to the conclusion of is when you use motivational interviewing, you're going to get to a place a lot faster where you'll realize if you need to refer out using MI, because you're going to ask the right questions, you're going to ask the open questions, you're going to get to a point where your evidence-based clinician mind is going to be like, this is out of my scope. And, I think that's true just because of the nature of the conversations.
Yeah, something that came to my mind was, you see, we're kind of in this, with nutrition, for example, as physical therapists, we have somewhat of a general knowledge base. But with the current stuff like COVID, for example, you see the meme of am I going to trust the people who've been researching it for their whole life, or Bobby who failed out of high school and saying blah, blah, blah. And it's okay, we don't want to be Bobby, but just from our knowledge and our general, science and health and wellness education, we're not Bobby. We're not, all of us know, at least hopefully know the general basis of what healthy eating is. Hopefully we're not going and saying, going outside of our scope of practice, and also, not going against maybe some of, the general guidelines that we've been taught and doing that. But I think if you just kind of stay in your lane and, hey, okay, I can give you some general recommendations. Okay, we want to go deeper. Here's a nutritionist that I've sent a couple people to. She's great. Go check her out. And we can be there for accountability, or, make that connection or create that bridge.
Yeah. When it comes to nutrition, I mean, it's like, if you go to APTA, it says it's in our scope of practice, but then it always punts you to the State Practice Act. And there's a website that's like a nutritional advocacy website that has collected each state's, they've looked into it for you, and they tell you which state it's legal and which state it's illegal to talk about nutrition if you're not a specific licensed, like a registered dietitian or a nutritionist of some kind. And there are only 11 states that say it is illegal to talk about nutrition in some capacity. That means, the remaining amounts say that you can, in some capacity, talk to patients about nutrition, but it still says, hey, stay in your scope, right? An example I have is somebody asked me how to, they wanted a meal plan that had low amounts of glutamate in it. And I had to even Google, if you have to Google what glutamate is and its role in brain health and function, I was like, this is way out of my scope. I'm like, I just went into the open-ended question. I said, have you ever, what reservations do you have about going to work with a registered dietitian? They said they don't have any. And I'm like, perfect. Like, go do that. Like, so I think the biggest thing that would be cool is that people use MI and not be worried about breaking laws and things like that when it comes to nutrition, because I think it's definitely, it has its role.
I think that's a great stopping point. 2 hours on the dot.
For sure.
Killed it.
I had like 4 more points, but I don't want to talk anymore. I'm good.
Yeah, I'm glad you could get this all out. And then for sure that Slack channel you set up would be a great talking point as well.
Yeah, for sure. If you guys want to join Slack, like I said, it's different from Facebook because it's independent of all the distractions. I get stuck in the student doctor of physical therapy group, reminding me I've got student loans. But the Slack channel is where I'm trying to grow some more discussions about this. So if you go to slack.motiveperform.com, that's MOTIV, you can just sign up. It doesn't cost anything.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining, especially the Michigan people. Represent. If any of you all like this format, next month or the next 4 weeks will be ACL post-op rehab. And I'm trying to get a clinician to speak for all 4 instead of me just rambling. So more than welcome to join. If not, you can email me because I think I have all of you all on like the Journal Club like email thread. And if you don't want to receive any of these emails, I'll just check you like out of those emails. So just let me know. But y'all enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thanks for joining. And thanks again, Andy. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Andy.
Yep. Adios.